Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we're talking about Succession Season 3, Episode 5, and the walls are closing in for the Roy family, especially Logan Roy. So the episode starts off and it seems like Logan is still recovering from his walk and he has a UTI. And watching him in this episode, it's clear that he really needs to pick a successor, and it's hard to tell if his sort of reluctance to make a deal was out of good instincts or because he was simply losing his mind. Ken, on the other hand, is desperate. We find out that the case against his father is losing support, and so he's trying to multitask and do a lot of things at once. And Logan is in a very good position after this episode. It seems like the attacks that they made on the president kind of really put him in a good spot. And at the end of this episode, they kind of managed to not only save their company, but sort of the Roy family's position in the company. And Logan's ego really got to him because by the end of the episode, we see that he blocks his son Ken. And I think this was to indicate that there will be no peaceful transitions. So if Ken wants to take over, he's going to have to throw his father out or murder him. Like, it's going to be quite bloody. So this is what I got at the end of it. So the episode starts off with the shareholder meeting. I was very impressed that we got to this meeting because this season for me has been very dynamic. We keep getting straight to the point. So if this was episode 5, I don't know what episode 9 will look like. They get to the meeting, there's protesters outside, people are very angry with them, and it seems like they have no deal, right? So they've been kind of working day and night to try and figure out a deal with Sandy, and there's nothing, right? So no deal means it goes to a vote, and if it goes to a vote, the odds of anybody in the Roy family ever kind of having power is pretty much slim to none. And so by force, everyone has to work together. And Logan's strategy is he just refuses to look weak, right? He doesn't want to make a deal, or he doesn't really want to make it look like he was the one that was eager for this deal, right? And he keeps kind of making observations that at first I thought were stubborn. But as the episode goes on, I'm like, maybe Logan is onto something. So he's kind of frustrated and he sends his minions out to kind of do the deal for him, right? Like he doesn't want to show his face. He doesn't want to be seen with these people. And so we get to this meeting between Sandy, I guess male Sandy and female Sandy. And this one was one of the most bizarre meetings I have ever seen. The first thing, you guys correct me if I'm wrong or if you caught this vibe, but I have a feeling that female Sandy has a lot more power over her father than she's kind of suggesting. Because during this meeting, they're kind of trying to come up with terms and conditions. And one of the terms and conditions that they kind of had was to create a veto to make sure that nobody in the Roy family ever is ever put in charge. And of course, Shiv and Roman don't want that. But as I'm watching female Sandy, I'm starting to realize like I think she has some power because there's this running theme throughout this episode of like a puppet master. And a joke is made during this very important meeting, like, I just do what my father tells me, just like you. And female Sandy said at one point, like, I'm only my father's messenger, I'm only his puppet. But when you contrast female Sandy to someone like Kendall, who throughout this episode kept calling himself like a puppet master, even though his father, has him by the strings, it just kind of makes you wonder, like, we know that Ken is not much of a puppet master, so what does that mean for her? So you guys let me know if you caught that vibe, but I think female Sandy has a lot more power. So unfortunately, this condition that they require is just not something that the family can give. And unfortunately, for the company to survive, they really need to separate the company from the family. Like, this is kind of a must. And so they're trying to negotiate, and Jerry and Carl, like, watching everyone try and save the company, while at the same time watching the Roy family kind of battle within themselves for power or kind of look like they're in charge was just a lot. You see that with the tension between Jerry and Shiv. So Jerry and Carl are like, you know what, maybe we should make this deal. Yeah, it embarrasses you guys, but to be honest, this company is embarrassing and we really need to just move on. And Shiv and Roman are just not having it, right? And they're both very annoyed. And at one point, Roman is really annoyed with Jerry, right? Because he's like, you need to be careful. I'm your prince. And one of the most sort of subtle scenes, I thought, was when Shiv kind of bypasses Jerry to call her father and inform him of the news. And again, Shiv, this episode, she's taking charge. And I think she kind of has a high after the last episode of kind of forcing ATN to run these negative stories on the president. So she's being more assertive, right? Like she's being, and her assertiveness, unfortunately, will probably be used against her at some point. In addition to this, watching Shiv and Roman was interesting because Shiv, again, she was very assertive this episode, whereas Roman was a loyal dog. You know, he was very loyal, not just to the family, but to his father in particular. So he was very adamant about making sure that his dad had the final decision, where Shiv was very adamant about saving the company and making sure that not just her family had the final decision, but she took credit for that final decision. So they kind of come back to Logan and they kind of present the deal. And the issue is deal or no deal. And the problem with this sort of situation is that Logan is not in the best state of mind, right? He has a UTI. For some bizarre reason, I guess nobody thought to bring his medication with him, or maybe I missed something, but I found it very odd that nobody was really keeping track of this, and the only person who was nowhere near him. So they kind of present Logan with this deal and they say, hey, this is very good. We have to take it regardless. And this deal gets increasingly petty, right? Like first they ask for veto rights, then they ask for, you know, the removal of private jets or to kind of reduce their consumption or something like this. And the whole thing is so petty and nitpicky, and you can just tell that both sides just hate each other's guts. And Logan makes an interesting observation. He says, why are they so willing to cut a deal? Unless first they got bad news or they're not doing as well as they say they are, right? They might not have the support that they say they do. And after the last episode, you know, they lost a big supporter in Adrian Brody's character. I believe his name is Josh. But Logan is not fully buying that Sandy and Sandy have everything they need to win this vote. And so Logan is very reluctant. And again, like the vibe I got from female Sandy was that maybe Logan was right. Like there was something weirdly, like it just wasn't adding up for me. And it just didn't make sense that they were taking orders from a man that clearly just was incapable of making decisions. And looking at even Logan's situation deteriorate and like Sandy's gone. You know what I mean? He is just not in a position to be making any decisions. Whereas Logan at least kind of looks like he could make decisions, but again, I couldn't tell if Logan's sort of reluctance was ego-driven, good instincts, or that his UTI was starting to get to him. And so Logan's answer is no, and it would not have been a problem if it wasn't obvious that Logan was losing his damn mind. And at one point, it's really interesting because Logan is very adamant. He really doesn't want to make a deal, or he doesn't want to make a deal that benefits them too much. And Tom says at some point when he was taking him to the bathroom that he got a phone call along the way, and they're all talking about whether or not, you know, Logan's decision is right or wrong. And I thought it was really interesting that Shiv was very unsure of what her father said. You know, she was like, are you sure he said no? And Roman and Tom were like, yeah, that was definite. That was like 1,000% like a no. And I think the breaking point comes when the UTI fully takes over and Logan is just losing his mind, right? And we're kind of reminded of season 1, I believe, where he was kind of having the same outbursts. And one of the funniest scenes is when he's convinced there's like a cat underneath his chair and they have to kind of like get this invisible cat out of his sight. Like they're trying to accommodate his delusions because he doesn't have his medication and he's kind of deteriorating. So that whole scene just made me laugh. Also the bit about Tom kind of taking him to the bathroom. Like Tom is very trusted. And watching Tom in this episode, it's really interesting because he's really trying his best to convince himself that he's loyal. But as the realities of prison set in, I don't think Tom can hack it. You know, I really think in the end, Tom will do whatever Tom can do to get out of the situation. And you can tell he's really trying to create a light at the end of the tunnel, right? He's really there for Logan. And at one point he pulls Shiv aside. And this was, again, one of the funniest scenes when he's like, yeah, like, you know, you smell really nice. And she's like, excuse me, sir? Like, have you been tracking me? And again, Tom needs some hope, right? He kind of, his hope is that Shiv will have a baby and just his desperation, right? Just his kind of thinking. But again, watching everybody in the group try like rationalize Logan's choices was interesting because all of them kind of were assessing whether or not Logan was maybe onto something. You know, like what if he is right? This is super exciting. And the only person that was really not with it was Shiv. She was just like, we have to make a deal. and I'm going to make this deal any means necessary. And as soon as Logan's out of the picture, something became very clear to me, which is that everyone is equal. Because he refuses to choose someone, there's no rank. Once he's out, everyone was just kind of equal. Like, they were all brainstorming equally. There was no one to look up to. There was no one to kind of automatically turn to and be, okay, you're in charge, or kind of had that leadership authority. And the most obvious sign of that was when Roman was tasked with talking to the president. That was the most bizarre thing ever. So they get a call, and the president apparently is on the phone, and he wants to talk to Logan, but Logan is kind of going through it. And so Roman they call him a bootleg Logan, which I thought was super funny. So they put Roman on the phone, and this phone call was so awkward because it was so above Roman's pay grade. Like, this just was not for him at all. Like, this just kind of blew my mind. And he's sitting there, and he's trying to be cordial but professional, and he gets off the phone, and we get the news that this president is retiring, which is kind of good because it shows that Logan had some power, but it's also really bad because they have no support. But with this news, we find that Logan is really by himself, right? Whatever deal they can come up with, it's really on their own. They have no real leverage outside of themselves at this point, and they're kind of desperately clinging on to life, and if they have any hope of surviving, they need to maintain this company. So watching Roman talk to the president it was just weird and bizarre and just like unnecessary. And finally, Shiv kind of takes charge, and she decides to make a deal, right? She's the one who says, you know what, I'm going to do it. And she goes off to meet with female Sandy. And this meeting between female Sandy and Shiv was weird. Shiv, on one hand, is someone who has no influence over her father. She can't manipulate him at all. Logan, on the other hand, can manipulate Shiv to do pretty much whatever he wants, right? He kind of manipulated her into thinking that she could one day take over. And he's very good at getting Shiv to do what he wants. Whereas female Sandy, I sense is the opposite. I sense she's somebody that can get her father to do the things that she wants. So watching these two, I got the feeling that Shiv may have misread Sandy. And although the deal from the outside looking in, it kind of stopped the bleeding, right? Because this episode is about stopping the bleeding. It's about making sure it doesn't go to this vote and kind of leaving it up to chance. Like, at least if they're able to make a deal, they can kind of control the narrative and the outcome. And so Shiv was kind of thinking in that sort of reactionary survival mode for the company. And she's able to cut a deal. And everybody's happy and excited. And the only person not happy is Logan. So once he kind of comes to, and it was really funny watching them trying to jumpstart Logan like he was some sort of, broken down vehicle, just because they were so lost without him, right? Without Logan, they were all just kind of like chicken with their head cut off. Like, they didn't know what to do with themselves. And so Logan was feeling kind of salty, I think, that Shiv was able to make this deal. And I think he was kind of jealous. Like, I think logically he knew she made the right choice, but he just couldn't give her credit for it. And he was so condescending, he was so rude. He was saying things like, of course you think it's a good deal. Usually the people who get the short end of the stick think it's a good deal, right? Like, he's throwing jabs at her. And one of the most passive aggressive moments is when he kind of looked away from her to talk to Jerry about business. And I thought this was interesting because Jerry is someone that he's also disrespected multiple times, bypassed, checked. So again, Logan is very manipulative in how he talks to people, how he kind of publicly shames people within the group. And Shiv is just standing there like tail between her legs. She goes back to her husband, Tom, and Tom is like, I swear I won't touch you. Like, I'll just hug you. Tom himself is kind of going through it. So thanks to Shiv, Logan is able to survive, but he's not really any closer to picking a successor, and his options are a knucklehead, as Connor said, which is Roman, a fake, which is Shiv, and the screwy Ken. So I want to talk about Ken and Greg. I think Greg was the best part of this episode. I think this episode for me, the most fascinating person was Greg. So I want to talk about Ken and the moment where Greg's life totally unraveled before our eyes. So Ken was very assertive this episode. He did his best. To be honest, he had to do multiple things at once. And he kept referring to himself as a puppet master, right? He kept saying puppet master is on it. And it's like, dude, by the end of the episode, you realize he's far from it. He's really trying to assert himself as a boss or someone who his father needs in order to kind of make things work. And so the one thing that Ken did very well is he kind of planted the idea in Stewie's head that if Logan were to make a speech, he could very well convince some of the shareholders. And it's very lucky that nobody saw Logan. It's very lucky that only the family and people, on his side saw him, because if the shareholders saw Logan in that state, he definitely would have lost. So I think Ken did a good job of kind of reasserting that his father was someone who's very persuasive and is not to be underestimated, which did help, especially with the coverage with the president. So I think Ken did a good job of kind of staying on top of it. He was frequently checking in. He was frequently he was really doing his thing. So Ken has to do multiple things. First, he has to save the company if he has any hopes of taking over this company. And at the same time, he has to keep momentum going for this case against his father, right? And one of the ways he does that is by pulling cousin Greg aside and pretty much telling him hey, snitches get stitches. So this was the most passive-aggressive conversation I have ever seen. So Ken has the audacity to pull Greg aside, which is more than what Greg did to Ken, to be honest. So Ken pulls him aside and he's like, you know what, I thought I should tell you that there's a chance that I might throw you under the bus. And his logic being that if I throw you under the bus, that gives them Tom, that gives them some people, and this might create a domino effect where other people turn on my father. It's not a must, but I'm just mentally preparing you for it. Cousin Greg is someone that is very frustrating because his grandfather warned him time and time again, you need to stay away from these people. This is not your family. Your family, they might be your family by blood, but they are not your family, boo-boo. They're not looking out for you. You need to look out for yourself. Take the inheritance money and go. And Greg does not listen. And what Ken informs him is that I'm abandoning you and you pretty much don't have me to rely on. And cousin Greg is sitting there totally shook, totally shocked. And cousin Greg, after he made a deal with the Roy family, he pretty much made himself entirely dependent on them and their protection, right? And without Ken, he's pretty much stranded. And not only that, he made the decision to side with Logan without consulting his grandfather, which I thought was totally insane, right? He made a decision on his own, and now he's paying for that decision. And at one point, Ken kind of calls him, he's very passive-aggressive throughout this conversation. He does not like cousin Greg, and he says, you know what? They don't really spend too much time on bottom feeders. They'll probably just use you to get to other people, so don't even take it as don't take too much offense to it. You're not that important, right? That was the sense that I was getting from Ken. And honestly, Greg is a bottom feeder. And he was an errand boy throughout this episode. And Ken, the thing with Greg is that he never fits in. He's there, but he serves no purpose because he's not. The family is Logan and his children. That's it. Everybody outside of that is they're just assistants. And watching Greg desperately run errands, be there on call, he doesn't fit into the background. He has no real function. He's not assertive enough. He just doesn't belong there. And he's just there. Throughout the episode, he's just there. He's taking up space. He's kind of he's the personification of a fly on the wall, right? He's kind of just a pest. I don't know. He's just there. But then Greg has the audacity. So after Ken talks to him and makes this move, Greg has the audacity to kind of go up to his grandfather and say, hey, maybe I should circle back to that lawyer you gave me. And his grandfather is looking at him excuse me, sir, are you okay? Do you need to get your head examined? This is not someone you circle back to. And his grandfather says, you know what, you need to take yourself more seriously. I told you time and time again that these people are evil as hell and you didn't listen. And to be honest, and what did he say? Your inheritance is the first that I cut. You're the first sort of person I kind of nixed out of my will. And so his grandfather is going to give all his money to charity, and he wants nothing to do with cousin Greg. And to be honest, Greg fully deserved that. I mean, the thing with Greg is he's the definition of just flying too close to the sun, right? And just because you're surrounded by strong people, that doesn't make you a strong person. And Greg, I think he was confused in, being in the proximity of power and all these narcissists and all these crazies. He thought that this was for him. He thought that by having all these people acknowledge him, it must mean they see something in him, and that's just not the case. So Ken kind of cut his losses, and throughout the episode, Ken is cautiously optimistic, and his optimism was at at a high when he observed his father like at his worst. And this scene when Ken kind of comes down to confront his family and tried to give this intense speech was just like satire at its finest. Like he's going down, he's like, you're not gonna ruin this. And they're just cutting him off left and right. They're like, you don't belong here, you're not wanted, leave, thank you for your concern. Like they keep cutting him off, like, sir, you're here for yourself, you don't give a damn about this company, get your delusional raggedy behind out of here. Like the way they talk to Ken, and he saw his father as well, right? Like he saw him in the state that he was in, and he was just like, I'm sure Ken was thinking like, yes, you know, at some point he's gonna have to come up to me and negotiate. And I think Ken naively thought that Logan would kind of, especially after the last episode, maybe consider backing down, but there's no indication of that. So Ken is feeling pretty confident. He's feeling confident to the point where he gets up on stage and starts, you know, basically this stage scene, he gets on stage and he starts reading off victims' names. And it's the most like tone deaf, insensitive, selfish act of life. He announces that he created a charity for all the people that have been harmed by his company, and he narcissistically walks off. And Ken, again, I feel like he did a good job, but I don't know. I feel like Ken got ahead of himself just a bit, and this might have been a situation where it would have been best to stay in the background, right? His absence had more power than clearly his presence. And the moment where I realized that Ken is a puppet, or just not someone that can, he doesn't have the foresight that his father has. So he's feeling okay, he's feeling confident, and then he gets the news that his father wants to talk to him. And he agrees automatically. And I think maybe the reason he agreed is that he saw his father in the state that he was in. And he was like, okay, it's time. Maybe he wants to talk. And Logan left him hanging, right? He leaves him in this small room that looks like an interrogation room from Law & Order SVU. Like he just leaves him in that little room, forcing Ken to call him. And then he blocks his number, right? And by blocking his number, Logan is making it clear that I don't know what you saw or what you think you saw, but like I'm strong and I never want to speak to you again. So I think Logan, it was a bit petty to block him. I think there was that ego involved, like, you know, maybe because he saw him in his UTI state, or that he kind of sees him as a weak old man, that he wanted to reestablish that power. So overall, I thought this was an excellent episode. I love everything about it. Even Connor, to be honest, like Connor surprised me this episode because he's very assertive. He's perfectly willing to take everybody down with him if he doesn't get what he wants. And he got what he wanted. He got a position in the company and he wants to run for president. And Connor is really under the delusion that he can win. Also, I like this whole meeting, you know, where they're kind of going on stage, killing time. You know, they have nothing to say. The videos that we're playing were so insensitive, you know, like we care about women. Like, no, you don't. You care about your damn selves. And again, I enjoyed the title of this episode because it speaks to, you know, the people who kind of invest in these companies. Like, these companies don't really respect their shareholders too much, right? Or at least the Roy family definitely doesn't. And so they had a gun to their heads. It was either they control the narrative or they kind of let the narrative get away from them. So overall, I thought this was a great episode. I don't know if this was only episode 5, I don't know where it's going, but I enjoyed myself. If there's something you picked up on or something I missed, please let me know, and I will catch you all later.